So I'm Chiara Scoccianti, nice to meet you. So I work here, I'm a scientist, and since the last 10 years I've been the Ethics and Compliance Officer of the agency, so ethical conduct and compliance, but also pretty much involved in research ethics. Do you hear, Lena? Okay, I just would like to give you a brief overview of our Research Ethics Committee, which started in 1982, and only in 2002 our Governing Council has approved the basic principles, the scope and procedures for the ethics review process of the agency. And the present structure and composition approved in 2009, I think as most ERBs, we have a majority of external members, we have senior individuals with different types of expertise in complementary areas, capable of reviewing the different types of research studies that we have at the agency. In the timeline, I also highlighted on the top some key guidelines or publication that came out and also influenced the proceeding of the IARC, IARC Ethics Committee. So first of all, the SIOM's publication for the International Ethical Guidelines, of course the GDPR, even though, as you know, there were data protection laws before and even more after. In this presentation, I would like to focus on ethical consideration in genomic research that we heard about also in the first part of this meeting. There was a working group of the IEC which has published a discussion paper on incidental findings. I will tell you a little bit more about that. And also aspect of data protection, how all this legislation worldwide has influenced how we process data at the agency, in an international agency. And more and more started quite recently, in 2022, a number of projects developing what we call AI systems. We are pretty much following the recommendation and regulation by UNESCO, but also by WHO, on how to develop this system. Okay, so this is just to highlight that the IEC has a particularity, specificity with regard to other ERB. We do not only focus on the ethical review process of a study, but also on we also act as a scientific committee, starting from the principle that a scientifically unsound, let's say, study is an ethically unsound study. This probably you know, just to give you an overlook of how the agency is involved, especially in low middle income countries. Our agency is quite unique among the leading cancer research institutes because of its focus on low middle income countries, and we collaborate with hundreds of LMIC around the world. This can be as part of international collaborative studies or because we act as coordinator in consortia or networks. And the reason is because the majority of new cancers, so this is the International Agency for Research on Cancer, then the majority of new cancer cases worldwide occur in low middle income countries, unfortunately, and it's predicted that future increases in cancer incidence will disproportionately affect low middle income countries. And this, of course, represents a significant health, social, and economic burden for the public health community. Thank you. I start again from the beginning. No? Okay. Do you hear now? In this context, so the IARC Biobank is a reference point internationally and provides support, but also leadership to other biobanks, and hosts one of the largest and richest collection of biospecimens and it was estimated in 2024 over 6 million sample. Okay, my presentation, we focus on the first 3 points. These are the major key ethical challenges faced by the IEC over the last decades. So how all these legislative and regulatory changes have influenced the data processing. I will mention ethical consideration genomic research, and also some studies developing that we have in-house developing artificial intelligence systems or tools or technology, how you want to call it. And of course, the IEC is pretty much considering the cultural and societal aspect of research, particularly in those studies carried out in low middle income countries. I will not focus on this last point. I just wanted to mention that this is as an example, the definition of ethnicity, focusing on the fact that we acknowledge that a worldwide international legal definition of ethnicity is lacking. So the IC, for example, in this instance, refer to this definition given by the UN Statistic Division, which highlights, if you have a look at it, the subjective nature of the term, and then support the need to collect local institutional review board approval for compliance with the local ethical consideration and to inquire about the social cultural context. Just generally, what we aim at the agency is to enable a chain of trust. So to enable research within an international context, this is achieved through the establishment of this chain of trust with, on one hand, you can say that regulate the entrustment and accountability within a research study, and at the same time stresses the responsibilities of all the actors that are involved. And the key role, as you know, in the establishment of a chain of trust is played by the informed consent form. So in this example, the donors entrust IARC or other collaborative research institution as a custodian of the samples and associated data by signing an informed consent form. And in turn, the agency or this other collaborative institution are accountable to the donor. And then we must set procedures regulating different aspects addressed by the informed consent form, such as quality of data collection, storing condition, length of storage, privacy, confidentiality, of course, right of access, and future use of the sample. So just dive in to the first topic of the presentation, how all these legislative and regulatory changes, which have really exploded worldwide, are influencing the work from an ethical perspective at the agency. This is a slide from the UN Trade and Development Agency, which shows the importance of privacy and data protection worldwide. And it shows that this is very recent, April 2024, and show that the vast majority, 71% of countries worldwide, has implemented the data protection and privacy regulation. This represents 71%, I believe, 137 countries out of 194. And Africa and Asia show different levels of adoption of this legislation. We have respectively, I think we are just above the mean, 61, 57%, while the share, unfortunately, in the least developed countries is only 48%. And countries such as those highlighted in reds, so you see Libya, Sudan, Venezuela, Afghanistan, have no data protection legislation at all yet. What is the implication for international research? So the positive aspect is that, as we have seen worldwide, the majority of countries has implemented data processing legislation. And the enforcement of such legislation is really seen as an opportunity for this research community, as for the European research communities, when looking for more standardization of the data protection practices, providing a number, hopefully raising the data flow, facilitating the data flow. And overall, it's observed worldwide that there are many more common elements among this legislation that there are differences. As we know, most of the principles contained in such legislation were already recognized key ethical principles, as those that, I mean, this is not, of course, an exhaustive list. And with the difference that at present, these ethical standards are entrusted by lawfulness and by measure of accountability. However, application of such legislation still vary worldwide, within some country, among countries. And particularly what is of interest to us is that some countries put an accent on the, as a legal ground for data processing on the consent, on a valid consent, while other on the legitimate interest, including Europe. So these are, from an ethical perspective, the only ethical ground for data processing is the consent form. And within this context, one of the main challenges faced by the IEC has been to create ethical rules for the evaluation of projects having collecting different types of consent for the use of biospecimens. At IARC, we receive biospecimens that are not only stored which are stored in our biobanks, that can be broadly classified into these three main categories, depending on the type of the informed consent which has been collected. Of course, the ideal case scenarios for us are those samples collected under a broad or unspecified consent for future use of the data and the samples, but still, also for these samples collected under the broad consent, the actual use remains, in our opinion, subject to the local authorization, so authorization under national laws and approval by the local institutional review board is if it's that relevant. So to facilitate research within this context of different data protection legislation worldwide, different types of samples obtained under different types of consent, our committee has revised. We have a standardized informed consent template, which maybe is similar to the unique consent template, which was mentioned in one of the presentation today. This is, of course, for new collection. And this had the advantage that we had the possibility to describe how data protection measure and processing and storage should be done to reflect international ethical standards that, as we know, are also pretty much international data protection principles. While on the other hand, we recognize that some of the most common breaches of ethical standards concern the use of the data which are collected for one purpose, and then they are used for other research, the data that are so-called secondary use of data. And in these cases, our committee focused its evaluation on the, as I mentioned, the type of the informed consent form and the compliance with the local ethical and legal framework. Depending on the context, we really have an ad hoc approach. Depending on the context, the committee can suggest to obtain a new consent, a waiver of consent, or a new, completely new legal basis to further processing the data. And of course, one of the measures that we implemented is also to recruit the IARC data protection officer as an IEC observer. And this is really an added value to facilitate the evaluation and approval of projects when you have the legal perspective inside. Okay, in these completely different topics, so the concern that we faced in genomic research, which is carried out at the agency by the genomic epidemiology branch, whose goals are to further the understanding of cancer prevention and early detection. And they are using a combination of genomic and traditional epidemiological methods. This I just show you two, let's say, two case studies, if you want. So as an example, IARC has coordinated this very big multograph studies. It's a Cancer Grand Challenge, it's a UK-funded project, aims to understand the causes of different cancer type by generating mutational signature profiles through whole genome and whole exome sequencing. And these profiles will help, hopefully, to identify mutational patterns, which might elucidate both how environmental agents cause common cancer, these common cancer that are shown on the slide, that also explain geographical differences in the incidence, in cancer incidence. And since the beginning of the study, since 2017, the study has collected more than 19,000 cases across the 5 continents and 24 participating countries. And so, needless to say, this is an impressive collection from a biobank perspective of different biological samples coming from high and low incident countries, which has led to other projects like, for example, this project, which is another international, very big international genomic consortium for cancer prevention. And together, just to give you an example, Prominent and Mutograph, the previous studies, have already recruited roughly 25,000 samples, including tumor tissue, whole blood, blood fraction, normal tissue, saliva. So beyond the challenges from a biobank and data protection perspective, such studies really raised the ethical challenge of the management of incidental findings. So we previous presentation focus on the return of information. If I've understood correctly, these are more information gathered during genetic testing when you identify variants that are clinically actionable. I mean, I hope I understand correctly. Why here, what I'm talking about are the so-called secondary or unintentional findings, those variants, those SNPs that are unrelated to the research or to the question under investigation. And the problem with these findings is this is not unique, not new to genomic research. However, still for today, we have limited guidance on the matter and no international consensus available on how to return the information and if to return the information to the study participants. Especially, as I mentioned, on the basis of is the variance clinically relevant and actionable? Can the variants potentially lead to improved prognosis or improved quality of life? So we constituted this working group to discuss, try to identify major key question raised by the management of incidental findings in genomic studies. So in broad terms, this issue could be categorized into 3 main categories. So I didn't order by these 3 categories. In any case, we have the validation of the variants. The variants need to be, it's discovered, need to be validated after, need to be clinically validated for relevance. The actionability of the variants and the process of the disclosure, if applicable, to the participants. So the first issue, for example, is the prediction based on these findings reliable enough, means does this variant have high penetrance? And thus an established intervention to prevent or treat the condition is efficient and reasonably safe, and this has been proven by, the careful review of the available literature. If you see a point 3, who will provide does the individual have actually access to the intervention, especially in unfavorable context, does the intervention is available to prevent or treat the condition within the context of the local healthcare, and who will provide this information? There is a clinical genetic counselor. There are specialists that are able to return the information. And point 5, what can we? I see this more as a wave of the adverse effects of the prediction on the individual, both and of the potential benefits. And when we are speaking about adverse effects, we can consider both in case of true prediction and in case of erroneous, false prediction. And okay, point 6 is what the impact would have return an information of a negative test. It means that there is no dangerous variant which has been found to the individual. And how do you consider that in these cases there is always a degree of uncertainty on the result, and that the research has inherently tested a limited set of variants? And of course, the more practical aspects, the additional costs. So how will this additional cost associated with managing the incidental findings, validating the incidental findings, and taking care of the process of disclosure to the participants will be funded? So based on all this consideration, the IEC recommended that at least in-house, for the studies of which we are responsible of, the condition for returning information on incidental finding in genomic research are not fulfilled. We are not adequate expertise or facilities to deal effectively with the return of information, which would, as I mentioned, require at least the presence of genetic counsel or at least the responsibility to verify that there is appropriate healthcare infrastructure in place to provide the clinical intervention when needed. And even in case of new studying using stored sample, the return of information could have been specifically excluded in the original informed consent form, or another aspect that we consider that would be, in our opinion, practically unfeasible to trace the participants. I'm speaking here of a very old collection or samples that are stored in our biobanks, on which we are doing secondary analysis. In any case, in our opinion, the consent form should emphasize the fact that the information produced by the studies is valid only for research purposes, should mention the possibility of incidental findings. This is for pure transparency for the donors. And also we recommended to mention the possibility of false positive results, and that in those cases the researcher should explain to the research participant that there is this possibility, and if local health structure is in place, genetic counseling is in place, eventually the variant might be clinically validated. All of this must be clearly addressed and explained to the participants. Okay, the last point was about stored sample. Already mentioned this. So this is the last topic, and this is because in-house there is an increasing number of studies developing what's called the artificial intelligence system. This is the definition given by the UNESCO. And the use of we call it tools such as algorithms, specifically in studies carried out in low and middle income countries, is a real plus, where efficient assessment methods for cancer diagnosis are lacking. Or, for example, also for studies to reach disadvantaged population, So overall, we see the AI technologies that are under development with the potential to decrease the existent inequality for access to screening programs or also for cancer diagnosis, so to allow the medical providers to make faster and more accurate diagnosis. Again, just an example. So this is a study developing a new device. Is an algorithm, is a new accurate diagnostic device for used during colposcopy, then for visual examination of the cervix. And this algorithm has been trained, so against histopathological images on which we have the diagnosis to recognize positive versus negative cases. And now it's in the evaluation phase, testing the device against blind cases, so histopathological images on which we do not have the diagnosis. The studies carry out in low-income country, India and Thailand, and among HPV-positive women, which are referred for colposcopy. Of course, all the women have consented to the procedure and to the use of the data. And another study is ongoing to train an eye device, a similar device, but able to detect cervical cancer in urine via spectroscopy, and this is in Zimbabwe. So this is another IARC studies. It is developing a user-friendly chatbot, and you can see it as an AI-assisted decision-making tool. Is aimed to increase the participation rate of socially disadvantaged women who has more difficulty to participate or to even access the French National Cervical Cancer Screening Program. And this chatbot is used for health promotion, and the target population, we believe, will certainly benefit from health communication and messages. And then this is called micro-targeting in the AI, to my knowledge, in the AI world, which would reduce the morbidity and social inequality among this target population. From the ethical perspective, in the studies, the IC evaluate the compliance with recommendations which are developed by UNESCO and, as I mentioned at the very beginning, by the WHO for the ethical development and implementation of AI technologies. And this recommendation covers principles of data protection, of course, of adequate testing. So there are specific steps to be followed for the validation of an AI algorithm, and of course many other principles. This list again is not exhaustive, but importantly, no discrimination for the use of these tools. On the contrary. And so this is just the example of the different validation steps for the algorithm that I presented for the cervical cancer detection via colposcopy in India. And so, yeah, very briefly, you can see that at the beginning, the training set is the first step is to validate the AI against images on which you have gold standards, in which you have the diagnosis, and after you further train against blind cases, and ultimately the recommendation by WHO is to test the algorithm in a randomized trial, so to verify the sensitivity and specificity which was proven during this laboratory validation in a real randomized trial. And interestingly, the data collected during the training phase will also serve the double purpose to feed an international cervical data images bank in support of early detection. So I conclude here, and this, of course, the IARC Ethics Committee, given the focus on the international research and international research in low middle income countries, has acknowledged since many years all these ongoing challenges and the need for continuous adaptation on our side. And so first things was, of course, to develop and implement a robust ethical review process, considering international ethical guidelines such as the Symposiums, but also demand us an increase of flexibility and continuous updates of our procedures, as well as this proactive approach as much as possible to all these emerging ethical issues. Okay, thank you very much.